Eala walked into her first-round match at the Australian Open, having hit over 1,200 practice serves across the previous week, averaging just under 92 miles per hour on the flat first ball and pushing her kick serve to nearly 2,800 revolutions per minute in the Melbourne heat. And yet the most dangerous moment of her tournament didn't come on breakpoint, didn't come in a rally, didn't even come during match play. It came in a crowd surge where, by her own account, she physically couldn't move. And that detail matters more than people think. Because when we analyze a young player's transition from prospect to global draw, we usually obsess over forehand patterns, return positioning, breakpoint conversion. But what happened to Alycia in Melbourne tells us something deeper about where she is in her career right now, and where this is heading over the next 3 months. Because here's the reality. Players don't start needing security until they've already become a problem for the rest of the tour. Now, if we rewind to the match itself against Alycia Parks, the scoreline 6-0, 3-6, 2-6, actually reveals more than a simple loss. Eala came out with extreme baseline aggression in that opening set. She was stepping inside the court, taking the ball early, flattening out her inside-out forehand, and crucially, she was neutralizing Parks' first serve by blocking returns deep into the middle third of the court. Parks thrives on short points, on first-strike tennis, on quick +1 patterns. Eala disrupted that completely in the first set, but matches at this level aren't won in 25 minutes. They're won in adjustments. Parks raised her first serve percentage from 48% in the opening set to nearly 67% across sets 2 and 3. That one adjustment alone flipped the dynamic. Suddenly, I was returning from a deeper position, her court coverage was stretched laterally, and her unforced error count climbed, particularly on the backhand wing when pulled wide. You could see the rally tolerance gap emerge. Eala's top spin RPM remained consistent, but the depth dropped by roughly half a meter. And at this level, that's the difference between dictating and defending. But I don't think the match itself is the main story here. The real story is what happened before it. Because when Eala describes being pinned against a wall, unable to move, with crowd pressure building behind her, that's not just a fan moment. That's a structural shift in her career. That's what happens when a player crosses from being known inside tennis circles to being recognized by the general public, especially a public as globally distributed and passionate as the Filipino fanbase. And we've seen versions of this before. When players from nations with massive diaspora populations break through, the crowd dynamics change instantly. It's not gradual, it's explosive. The decibel level spikes, the practice courts fill up, and suddenly even non-stadium matches feel like center court environments. Jessica Pegula mentioned hearing Eala's match from the hotel in Dubai, which, from a technical standpoint, tells you everything about crowd density and acoustics in those venues. Dubai is not known for overwhelming attendance, yet Eala's match generated enough sustained noise to carry across the complex. That's not normal. That's not even common for top 5 players unless they're playing finals. And this is where we need to connect the dots between crowd energy and performance metrics. Because crowd support isn't just emotional, it directly impacts how players execute under pressure. When you have that level of backing, your risk tolerance increases, you go bigger on second serves, you step in on returns you might otherwise chip, you take the inside-in forehand earlier. But it also comes with a cost, expectation. Eala admitted that the exposure was overwhelming at the start of the year. That's completely consistent with what we see in players making this jump. The timing of her Australian Open debut coincided with a spike in visibility, and you could see that in her shot selection under pressure. In the second set against Parks, she had 3 breakpoints at 2-2. On 2 of them, she missed inside-out forehands that, earlier in the match, she was making comfortably. That's not a technical flaw. That's a processing overload. That's a player still calibrating to a new level of attention, a new level of consequence. And then you layer in the off-court chaos, the crowd incident, and suddenly the narrative shifts from young player loses in 3 sets to young player navigating a completely new ecosystem. Because let's be clear, not having security at that stage is actually normal for players ranked outside the very top tier. But the moment that changes, it changes fast. Eala herself said she didn't think she needed it. That mindset, wanting to stay grounded, not wanting to feel like her head is getting bigger, is admirable, but it can also leave players unprepared for exactly the kind of situation she found herself in. And that situation, in my view, is a turning point. Because once a player recognizes that their presence alone can create risk in a crowd environment, they start thinking differently about everything. Scheduling, movement around the grounds, even practice routines. You don't just walk onto an outside court anymore. You plan entry and exit points. You coordinate with tournament staff, you manage access. That's part of becoming a top player. It's not glamorous, but it's real. Now, if we bring Desira Krajcik into this, her advice to Eala, simply asking for security, sounds obvious, but it's actually a sign of how quickly Eala's status has changed relative to her own perception. Krajcik has been around the tour long enough to recognize the pattern immediately. Eala, by contrast, was still adjusting to the idea that she belongs in that category. And that gap between how others see you and how you see yourself is one of the most critical phases in a player's development. Because once those align, performance usually stabilizes. Now let's talk about the technical side of where Eala's game is right now, because that's going to determine whether this surge in popularity translates into consistent results over the next 3 months. Her forehand is already WTA Tour level in terms of spin and placement. She can generate heavy topspin cross-court and flatten it out down the line when she has time. The key for her is improving the transition between those two modes, knowing when to stay high margin and when to go for the winner. Her backhand, particularly under pressure, still needs work. The contact point drifts when she's pushed wide, and her recovery steps aren't always efficient. That's where players like Parks were able to exploit her in the later stages of the match, forcing her into defensive backhand positions, and then stepping in on the next ball. Her serve is improving, but the second serve is still attackable. The kick serve has good shape, but the placement isn't consistent enough yet to prevent aggressive returns. Against top 50 players, that's going to be targeted repeatedly. Now, let's layer in the betting perspective, because this is where things get interesting. Coming into the Australian Open, Eala was priced as a clear underdog against Parks, with odds reflecting her lack of experience at this level. But after that first set, live betting markets shifted dramatically. She was briefly favored, which tells you how convincing that early performance was. Looking ahead, I expect her odds to tighten significantly over the next 3 months, especially in tournaments where crowd support is a factor, New York, Dubai, and anywhere with a strong Filipino presence. That crowd dynamic isn't just noise, it's a measurable variable in performance. If I'm projecting her trajectory, I see a player who's going to have volatile results in the short term, deep runs mixed with early exits, but with a clear upward trend in key metrics. First serve percentage, breakpoint conversion, and unforced error reduction. The biggest question is how quickly she adapts to the off-court demands. Because what happened in Melbourne, being physically unable to move due to crowd pressure, is not a one-off. It's a preview. This is what her career is going to look like if she continues on this path. And based on what we've seen so far, there's no reason to think she won't. Her ability to generate pace, her willingness to play aggressive patterns, and her composure, despite everything, suggests a player who's not just here for the moment, but building towards something much bigger. So, when she asks, why do I need security? That's actually the wrong question. The real question is, how quickly can she build the infrastructure around her game to match the level she's about to play at? Because the tennis is already close. The attention is already there. Now it's about alignment. And if she gets that right, we're not going to be talking about first round exits or crowd incidents. We're going to be talking about second weeks, quarterfinals, and eventually whether her game holds up deep into Grand Slam draws. That's where this is heading. And Melbourne, chaotic as it was, might end up being the moment where everything started to make sense. Talking about first round exits or crowd incidents, we're going to be talking about second weeks, quarterfinals, and eventually whether her game holds up deep into Grand Slam draws. That's where this is heading. And Melbourne, chaotic as it was, might end up being the moment where everything started to make sense.